Obviously, you always have the option to have a secondary. Whoa, the sound just shows up. Okay, thanks, Lisa. Yeah, so for a secondary engine, the backup engine, it would be really great to see an electric as backup, and I imagine that those boats probably do have backups. That would be an appropriate second, but not for primary. Just feedback, as always. We haven't done a hard policy on these things. Thanks.
Thank you, Director Grieve. And for those who don't know out there, sorry, Director Arbor, I'm sorry. We have had our technical difficulties, I think, rectified here, which is great. Were there any other comments or questions? Seeing none, thank you so much. I think it's great news, and I understand that there was very little that search and rescue had to do on their end to make this compatible with their needs. So good news story, thank you. Is there anyone opposed to receipt? Seeing none, we do have a recommendation. Grant and Cole-Hamilton, and the recommendation is basically to enter into this agreement with search and rescue for the shared use of the boat. All in favor? Anyone opposed? And that's carried. Thank you. So moving on to the utilities governance review follow-up. Grant and Grieve, and we'll turn over to staff. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair and Directors. And Jake Martins is here, General Manager of Corporate Services, to outline the report and answer any of your questions.
Thank you, Russell, and through the chair, for those of the Water Committee members that also sit on the Sewage Commission, this will be a bit of a repeat, but hopefully an enjoyable one, perhaps. So back in 2018, the Water Committee will recall that a utilities governance study was conducted in order to address and investigate some concerns which had been raised in regards to the decision-making and representation on both the Sewage Commission and the Water Committee. This was supported by consultants Allison Nielsen and Sherry Hurst, who helped to work with staff and elected officials and conducted a series of interviews, meetings, and presentations with those groups, as well as Comox First Nation. The review considered 4 different alternative models, the first being a separate and distinct corporation, the second being a utilities commission, which would be governed by a body of expert panel members that would be paid. Third was a review board that would function in a similar manner. And the final was just a revamping of the Management Advisory Committee, which currently exists, but that would basically include some further rigor around their decision-making process, leading towards the Sewage Commission and Water Committee, as well as some additional resources to support those efforts. Upon review of those 4 different models and considering the objectives of the report, there was not one single model that the consultants and that staff and the elected officials felt was kind of across the board improvement. So there was no recommendation for change from the existing structure. This was further contemplated by staff meetings conducted again with the municipal partners as well as Comox First Nation, and they also came to that same conclusion. So the focus of this report was really the minor recommendations which were put forward by the Water Committee and the Sewage Commission for enhancements to the process and the governance of these bodies. Those were staff-based as well as specifically to the Water Committee and Sewage Commission and the CVRD board. So with respect to the staff-based actions, those are included in the appendix, and they really speak to the Management Advisory Committee and its structure, its conduct, its timing of communications, and its general relations and work in regards to projects and reports. The report notes that there has been certainly some improvements that have been noted, and these are detailed there around the engagement of administrators around politically sensitive issues, as well as just the conduct of these bodies to try and ensure that they're meeting effectively and providing the sound advice to the various bodies. With regards to the Water Committee and the Sewage Commission, there was a proposal identified to increase the level of expertise in the decision-making process. And in this regard, a review board policy was suggested that would be based on dollar thresholds in which projects would go through a third-party review. In regards to this, the report attaches a draft policy in this regard, and Chris LaRose is joining me here today. And perhaps, Chris, I could just ask if you could provide a bit of a summary of that proposed policy.
Sure, thanks, Jake, and through the chair. So yeah, the proposed policy includes thresholds above which capital cost thresholds above which a value management process would be required for a project. So we've employed this this approach successfully for both the Comox Valley Water Treatment Project and more recently the sewer conveyance project. So the proposed thresholds would be so above $25 million, a project would require to undergo one value management process. And then above $75 million, it would be required to undergo that same process twice at optimal timing or through the project delivery. So once just after the kind of options analysis, and then again after the preliminary design would be completed. The process is very rigorous and comes along with a fairly significant price tag. However, so just to put it in context, the water treatment project attracted a cost of about $200,000 to bring in the required experts, walk them through an intensive 1-week process, and then a completed report. However, on a project of over $100 million, any optimization of the project scope can very quickly more than offset to that investment, and that's exactly what we found through the conveyance and the water treatment projects. So the policy is based on the Value Management Canada process. It was developed in consultation with the City of Calgary, who have a very robust in-house value management team. Yeah, I think that's it for me. Back over to you, Jake.
Nope.
Thank you. Thanks, Chris. And so the final item, just to summarize as part of this report, is the recommendations which are included in that consultant's report around the inclusion of Comox First Nation in the governance processes for the water and sewer services. And so the board is certainly, the committee is certainly aware that non-voting participation has been invited, and there has been attendance in that regard in the past. However, the report recognizes that sort of further specific engagement between the parties needs to occur in order to further explore and consider this matter. And so a good process has been established through regular meetings between the parties. And this is intended to be an item in which when both parties are able to set aside the necessary resources and focus on this matter, that it intends to be resolved at that time. So nothing to report at the moment, but certainly I think a good foundation is there for us to move forward on this at the appropriate time. And with that, I'd be pleased to answer any questions.
Great, thank you. And Director Arbor, I've got you good to go there. Thank you.
Thanks. Thanks, Chair. We have 45 minutes before the board, so I'm going to attempt to filibuster this item. In terms of what Chris was talking about, I think it's really great, but maybe, for the public or whatnot, the terms that are being used, like value management, which you're right, prove totally helpful. And maybe another term I would think about is just peer review, where an intensive, comprehensive peer review in a way, right, where you bring a team of outside independent engineers and they kind of look through the microscope at your assumptions and process and all the rest of it. Is that basically what is happening?
Yes, it could definitely be characterized as a peer review. Absolutely.
Yeah.
Value management is the term used in the industry, but that is effectively what it is.
And I think what we saw, maybe not at water, but at sewage, in the commission you chair, it can also help with sometimes people come up with better ideas. I still hear people that say we should shut down the sewage plant and build one south of Courtney, and so it's not just our staff. You bring experts from everywhere in addition to our contractors, so it's a lot of professional people that look at how to maximize the dollars on these big projects and the different approaches that could be taken. So I'm glad to see it. I'd be curious to know if we really stand out on this. If you mentioned Calgary, but you didn't mention, are we actually leading the way in regional districts in taking that kind of approach, or is that something that is being adopted elsewhere? That's my final question.
Sure. So starting with the last one, so I'm aware that Metro Vancouver has a value management policy. I'm not sure about any of the other regional districts, so I wouldn't say we're the first, but we're yeah. And then back to your point about peer review. You know, peer review is typically done by an individual or a firm. This, as you further intimated, this is a much more structured process. It includes a number of different disciplines and experts, and then the process that they walk through within that week is very structured, and it's like a sophisticated brainstorming process that that has a very fine-tuned and evolved kind of process to tease out those efficiencies. Yeah.
Great, thank you. Director Hillian.
Thank you, Chair. I think Director Arbor makes a really good point that this process provides an added level of discernment that I think can be really useful to the project itself, but also in the face of some of the criticism that we do get from some quarters, some of the self-appointed experts in the community, perhaps. I did want to pursue, though, a question that came up at Sewage Commission, and that is that the policy sets the $25 million threshold, and it also provides for using the value management review when the threshold doesn't meet 25 million, if there are compelling reasons to do that. I pointed out that there was nothing in the policy that indicated the ability to waive the requirement if it in fact was at the 25 million or just exceeded it and was relatively straightforward where staff felt it wasn't required. And I think the clarification was that that would be subject to perhaps a request to the board to waive the policy in that instance if such an occurrence came up. Could you clarify that?
Sure. Yes. So I think actually Jake made that point. That's always the board always has that ability to run counter to a policy, and I just highlighted that we didn't foresee or we couldn't envision a scenario where a project of that magnitude wouldn't benefit from this type of process, but that if that were the desire of the board, then a path exists to avoid it.
Sure. And the one other question I had was with regards to Comox First Nation representation. I do notice that it's not exercised particularly often or regularly, and I'm just wondering if we have any clarification as to whether that's a capacity issue or a feeling that without a vote they're not as interested in engagement at this point.
I'd comment that they appreciate the mechanism that the regional district has in place in terms of attending their meetings and updating them and then providing feedback as chief and council rather than an individual. But they also do get copies, both staff and the representative, of all the agendas and minutes of these meetings. So they do have the opportunity to see what's on the agenda and potentially come. And I do know in the past that there was a bit of a conflict in scheduling, but I think they have adjusted meeting schedules, so that may not be a factor anymore as well.
Thanks very much. I'll just add that I really do appreciate the work that staff does to maintain that level of engagement, which I think is of very high quality. Thanks.
Great, thank you. Are there any other comments or questions? Seeing none. Is there anyone? Thank you so much. Oh, go ahead. Got another comment.
Sorry, Madam Chair, just one final note to explain sort of the path forward should the Water Committee wish to support this policy. So we brought this to the Sewage Commission and they're now bringing it to the Water Committee, and should it be supported, then as the recommendation outlines, we're recommending it be referred to the Comox Strathcona Waste Management Board for their consideration and feedback. If they have any objections or concerns to it, they could certainly relay those back to the board. But presuming that there is no concerns, then a report will be provided to the CRD board following that meeting to convey the support of the Water Committee, Sewage Commission, and the Comox Strathcona Waste Management Board, in which case it could then be adopted as a corporate board policy for applicability to all services across the organization.
Great, thank you very much. Director Arbor.
One last one, because I guess Chris mentioned that the value management existed at Metro. And I guess a comment to our board is this should not lower our amount of diligence at the board table here, because I'm just reminded myself of what just happened in North Vancouver with the sewage treatment plant and the absolute complete disaster this has been. I don't know if that went through a value management process or just contracting issues or what it is, but what I do know, talking to a Vancouver councillor a couple of weeks ago about that, is that you know, in the early days, the political attention was not super high because you have all these experts. So I think it's good for us as board members to still really remain eagle eye around those larger projects. And maybe I will ask Chris, I saw a bit of nodding, but was there value management and those sort of things applied to that project? We're talking about $1 billion that is now kind of gone up in smokes.
Yeah, I'm sorry, I don't know, but I can certainly find out, because you're right. I'm also curious now that you brought it up.
Great, thank you for that comment. Yeah, it's we often hear as elected officials, stay out of it. You're not the experts. You don't know anything. But then when something goes wrong, it all comes back to us. So good points. Thank you. Okay, seeing no other comments or questions, is there anyone opposed to receipt? Seeing none. Thank you. Hillian and Grant. And any other further comments or questions on the recommendation, which is to refer this to the Waste Management Board for feedback before being considered to be adopted. Seeing none, all those in favor of the recommendation? Anyone opposed? Seeing none, that's carried. Thank you. Okay, moving on to the Comox Valley Water Supply System Consumption Report for receipt. Didn't catch the mover, but McCollum and Grant, thank you. And any questions or comments about the consumption report? This is a fairly standard item that comes before us. Seeing none, anyone opposed to receipt? Oh, we have Director Hillian. Thanks.
Thanks, Chair. Just an observation. I believe it was in another report that I read in relation to today's meetings that there was a reference to the early part of this year being deceased rainfall, which was an interesting turn of phrase. But I did want to ask if the lack of rainfall in the earlier part of the year did in fact make a difference to the water consumption in the district.
Thank you.
And Chris, do you want to comment, please? Thanks.
Actually, I believe we have Mike Hirschmiller on the line. Mike, are you able to speak to that question?
Yeah, sure. If you can all hear me, there was some technical difficulties at the beginning, but this will be fixed. I know the daily consumption during kind of November, December, January, February are usually very consistent. The rainfall doesn't really affect usage because there's very little outdoor use anyway during that time of year. So it really is just that's kind of where we get our minimum average, what a household kind of needs to do their washing and cleaning and whatnot. So that's kind of where we get our minimum flow from. So we didn't see much of a difference.
Thank you. Okay, no other comments or questions? Anyone opposed to receipt? Seeing none, that's carried. And now if I could have, I believe we're at the in camera, could I have a motion to move in camera? Thank you. This is under section 91K of the Community Charter. Anyone opposed to moving in camera? Seeing none? Thank you. We'll move in camera.